So, the translations are out for My Hero Academia Manga Chapter 413, and we're finally going to get most likely into how we're going to be defeating Tomura Shigaraki, and it's going to be in a very unexpected but potentially interesting way, and you'll get to see why, but first, right after this. Hey guys, how's it going? It is your boy, Manga Mandrew, and I'm here to cover the Chapter 4, My Hero Academia Manga Chapter 413, titled Lump of Lead. And that is most likely referring to Tomura Shigaraki and the fact that he has so much hatred inside of him that it's pretty much equivalent to just a lump of lead in his chest. However, from what we're getting in this chapter, it may not be completely purely just a lump of lead, and that there may actually be a crack that Midoriya can exploit to potentially defeat him. And that's pretty much what we're going to be talking about in this review. Just what's going to be happening with Tomura Shigaraki and how Deku is potentially going to defeat him. And before we dive more into that aspect of the chapter, let's talk about the first part of the chapter, which is pretty much the reveal of what Star and Stripe's purpose in the entire story is supposed to be. Because many people believe that her entire and only sole purpose is to weaken Tomura Shigaraki in their actual battle. But from what we get in this chapter, it's a little bit more than that, and this is something that I kind of predicted and knew from the start when it came to her reveal in the last moments of her life. And that is, what she was doing was not strictly to nerf Tomura Shigaraki, but actually be the building block to lead to his actual defeat. Because this chapter pretty much confirms that at the very least, there are some embers of New Order, Cassie Bates, Star and Stripe residing within inside of All for One. Now, this does not necessarily mean that Tomura has access to New Order, but very much like the embers of One for All residing in All Might after he passed the quirk on to Deku, it is not an impossibility, but it is possible that she is still residing within inside of All for One in a way, and that by that being the case, she was able to convey some important information to All Might, who comes to realization that the fact that he's able to see within inside of All for One and One for All from a long distance away may mean that One for All is becoming frayed. It's about to become undone, which is most likely going to be what is going to be happening within this fight. Deku losing bits and pieces of One for All throughout the entire battle. So I think that this chapter pretty much confirms one of the other purposes that Star and Stripe served as a way of being the building block needed for Deku to be able to actually achieve his dream of saving Tomura in this battle and being most likely the linchpin in the defeat of Tomura himself. Also, just wanted to bring up, we get to see Ed Shotworm, and whether or not he survives or is dead, I think I'll be fine with it, as long as the consequence of his actions is that he remains this little worm. Sure, he may still be alive, but he did have a massive cost to it. So, as long as he doesn't return back to his normal self, I will be okay that he didn't die. But that's besides the point. We're getting more into the chunk and the girth of this chapter, or the lump of lead, where we get to see Deku being thrown away by a massive explosive force by Tomura. And how we're actually getting to see the drawbacks of Gear Shift in action. Literally him unable to move at this moment. But this is the moment where we actually get an explanation from what we got last chapter of Kudo explaining to Deku what it means for him to finally give up One for All. And the gist of it is that what he's planning on doing is to use himself and the other vestiges potentially of One for All as sort of like quirk bullets to literally shoot at the lump of lead inside of Tomura, hitting the crack, breaking it open, because at this moment they cannot defeat him physically, but they will be able to defeat him mentally within his consciousness. And what is very interesting about this is that how he's explaining that the lump of lead is his hatred and how the crack can be broken apart, he also brings up something that we haven't really seen in a while. An explanation that makes sense for how this is possible. where he explains to Deku as well as the other vestiges what this plan actually entails. It is very similar to Bakugo throwing a paper at Deku and trying to reevaluate and reestablish what it means to transfer the quirk of One For All, where with enough force, he predicts that he's not only able to do damage to All For One and the ball of hatred inside of Tomura, but that by doing so could also make sure that the quirk cannot be used by All For One and Tomura Shigaraki against Deku. And this is why he suggests that he should be the first one to test out this theory, not only because of the idea that if he gets shot at him, he will be able to do damage, but also provide no benefit to Tomura in this fight, but he also believes that by doing so, he'll be able to transfer the drawback that is being placed upon Deku by using Gear Shift onto Tomura, which would cause him to very much be unlikely to move. But unfortunately, there is some pushback, specifically from In, as well as Bruce pushing back against this idea, and even In suggesting that he should be the one to be the guinea pig for it. But unfortunately, Kudo stands on his decision to be the one because he believes that by transferring over, even if he doesn't break on impact, that he'll be very detrimental to Tomura in this moment. And the transferring of the drawback from Deku to Tomura does make sense within the world of My Hero Academia by the fact that Search was able to retain the information that Ragdoll learned, and it was transferred over to Tomura when All For One was placed inside of him. So if saved data can be transferred over with the quirk, then maybe potentially the drawbacks as well. And overall, the reasoning why Kudo is doing this is that he's finally placing his faith in Deku, and that he's willing to take this risk because he finally believes in what Deku has been saying, which is really showing a level of development that we really did not expect from the vestiges themselves, especially from Kudo. And with this idea in mind, you would think that potentially Deku would be very resilient to this actually being the case, but then you just have Nana pretty much explaining that no, Deku would be fine with this. He's not afraid of dying or that he craves power, but that the reasoning why he will be hesitant to do this is because One For All is a special gift. A gift given to him by All Might, his favorite hero. So obviously, within Deku's character, he wouldn't want to give up something that belonged to someone that he admired the most. But because he is also a hero, he's also willing to make the sacrifice if it means potentially saving Tomura. And we get that conviction in the last part of the chapter with a double-page spread of Tomura Shigaraki charging at Deku, as we have Kudo telling Banjo and Yoichi to watch after Deku and be the ones to remain inside of him, implying that if any of the quirks were to be lost completely or stolen by Tomura in this moment, that Deku would most likely have the remaining original One For All quirk as well as Black Whip. And that is very important because the chapter ends with the double-page spread of Deku literally covered in Black Whip, with the implication that the Black Whip is all throughout his body under the skin, being what is able to move him in a state where he shouldn't be able to move due to the drawbacks of Gear Shift, as well as Tomura making a reference to what Deku looks like covered by Black Whip, with the idea that by looking at him right now, he doesn't look like he's a hero, as we see a shining bright light glowing off of Deku's left hand, the implication being that that may actually be Kudo, and that Deku may be, for the first time, forcing One For All onto someone else and doing it in an offensive way. So, what did I think of this chapter? I think that this chapter was amazing. There are a lot of things that this chapter is doing that not only are things that I kind of predicted, mainly when it came to Star and Stripe, but also very interesting when it comes to the idea of potentially Deku losing the quirk of One For All, if not completely, partially. And that doing so will allow him to battle against Tomura in a way that isn't just fully fisticuffs and physical. He is going to be battling Tomura on a mental level within the mindscape of the Vestige world, but he's not going to be doing it to harm Tomura or weaken him in any way, but to free the inner child inside of him that was confirmed to be there, and that this information could have only been conveyed to him by the inclusion of Star and Stripe in the story. So once again, a lot of what we're getting in this chapter is something that was built up not just within the entire series as a whole, but within the Act 3 itself, showing that this is something that Horikoshi has been planning for a while and it's finally coming into fruition. And overall, I just enjoyed it, especially the final page with Deku and the black whips covering his entire body, not only being a callback to the Dark Deku arc where he became a pseudo-vigilante, but also it just looks cool aesthetically. And the black lines on his body from Black Whip just looks aesthetically pleasing and enjoyable to look at. As well as the implication that Deku is going to forcefully transfer it over, in reference to Kudo and the quirk gear shift, to Tomura, and whether or not that's going to be by him touching him and then the quirk just coming out of his hand, or potentially touching the whole of Tomura and then just forcefully jettisoning the quirk inside of him, damaging the inside of that lead core. So most likely in the next chapter, we're going to be seeing this plan come into play and potentially seeing the reveal of New Order being revealed by Tomura that could put a hindrance on this plan, but ultimately leading to potentially a success. Whether or not Kudo gets destroyed or hinders Tomura is going to be up in the air, but what we do know potentially for a fact that it is going to do damage to that lead core, and it's going to give the convictions of the other vestiges inside of One For All more reasons to believe in Kudo's decision, which would believe more in Deku and finally lead to the conclusion of Tomura being defeated. And whether or not that's going to be happening within the next chapter, or we may cut over to another battle scene, either what's happening with Aizawa as well as Present Mic with Kurogiri, finally getting to see what's going on with Sero, or continuing this fight. Whatever is going to be the case, we won't be knowing for another 2 weeks, unfortunately. But we got a lot to really ponder over for the next 2 weeks, so hopefully you'll have some questions or some ideas of where this story is going to be going. And if you do, why not leave a comment down below and subscribe to my YouTube channel if you want to see more content like this. So, do all that cool jazz, and hopefully I'll be able to catch you in my next video. Goodbye!